prosecution. May I proceed?
Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Dr. Sikorsky.
Good afternoon.
Please state your name to the court, spelling your last for the record.
My name is Dr. Pat Sikorsky. That's Sikorsky.
Dr. Sikorsky, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm the director of the criminalistics department at the Midlands Crime Scene Investigation.
What kind of education do you have that allows you to hold this position?
I hold a dual PhD in chemistry and biology from Washington University in St. Louis. I have bachelor's degrees in chemistry and leadership from Marshall University, and I'm an adjunct professor at the Midland State University where I teach courses on DNA analysis.
What experience do you have as a criminalist?
Well, before becoming the director, I was a criminalist for 10 years.
Outside of your current occupations, what else have you accomplished in your field of expertise?
I've actually published 28 peer-reviewed articles that relate to DNA testing, chemical comparison, and things of that nature.
Dr. Sikorsky, how are you involved in today's case?
I was called by the prosecution to analyze a briefcase.
For your investigation, were you provided with, for your analysis, were you provided with sufficient facts and data?
Yes, I was.
Did you use reliable principles and methods?
Yes.
What were those principles and methods?
Well, on the briefcase, I used ACE-V, which helps me analyze fingerprints that were found on the briefcase, along with mitochondrial DNA testing to determine the hair that was found inside the briefcase. I also used GCMS testing to test a fragrance stain that was found inside the briefcase, and I used DNA testing through CODIS to determine a DNA profile on the left leg.
Did you apply those principles and methods reliably to the facts and data of today's cases?
Yes, I did.
Now, in your analysis, what were your findings?
I found 6 fingerprints on the outside of the briefcase on numerous places. I found a DNA profile on the left latch, which is essentially just little skin cells left from when you touch something. I also found a fragrance stain inside of the briefcase on the fabric and strands of hair.
Now, earlier you mentioned certain procedures that you used while conducting your analysis on this briefcase. I'd like to take them one at a time. Starting with the ACE-V test, what is that?
ACE-V is actually an acronym that stands for Analysis, Comparison, Evaluation, and Verification. It's passed peer review dozens of times, and it's used primarily for fingerprint analysis.
Let's break the 4 stages of this test up for the jury to understand. Now, please explain to the jury the analysis stage.
Well, first, the analysis stage is where we look at the prints that we have found and determine if they have suitable quality to go through further testing. I found that all 6 prints that I removed off of the briefcase were of suitable testing. And
the comparison stage?
The comparison stage is where we compare fingerprints that we found with suspects or databases like the IAFIS, which is the FBI's Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. We do this to include or exclude suspects. I actually personally went to the Midland State Police Department when Chase Covington and Avery Bancroft were arrested and retrieved their fingerprints.
And please explain the evaluation stage.
The evaluation stage is where we evaluate found fingerprint with that of one that was matched by comparing the ridges and furrows on your fingerprints, so the little edges that you have on your fingerprints. At each point, we call them points, that they match up, then we use that. You need 16 points of comparison to have a sufficient match.
And finally, please explain the verification stage of this process.
The verification stage is where we get a third-party analyst to basically double-check, in a sense, all of the primary examiner's work. So in today's case, I was the primary examiner, and the analyst that double-checked my work came to all of the same conclusions.
Now, where did you find fingerprints on this briefcase? How many fingerprints did you find on this briefcase exactly?
I found 6 different fingerprints on the briefcase.
Where were they on the briefcase?
I found 2 on the outside edge of the lid, and I found 3 on the handle, and 1 on the right side latch of the briefcase.
And from your analysis of ACE-V, what can you tell us about these fingerprints?
there was a 19-point comparison of the fingerprints that were on the outside of the briefcase that were consistent with Avery Bancroft's right and left index fingers, along with the fingerprint that was on the right side latch had a 16-point comparison to Avery Bancroft's right thumb. One of the fingerprints on the handle at 16 points of comparison was found to be Avery Bancroft's right index finger, and the remaining 2 fingerprints on the handle were that of Chase Covington's at 16 points of comparison of her right hand, middle, and ring finger.
Thank you, Dr. Sikorsky. Now let's move on to the strands of hair that you found on the inside of the briefcase. How many strands of hair did you find inside the briefcase?
I found a total of 5 different strands of hair.
How did you test those strands of hair?
I used mitochondrial DNA testing.
Please explain what mitochondrial DNA testing is to the court.
Mitochondrial DNA testing is essentially where we look at the mitochondrial DNA sequence of the hair. We do this by essentially extracting the mitochondria out of the hair and comparing it with samples of other mitochondria.
Did you compare it with the mitochondrial DNA of anyone else?
Yes, I compared it to Chase Covington, Avery Bancroft, and Tracy Manitos. Tracy Manitos is Chase Covington's stepsister.
And what were your findings after your analysis?
I found that the hair came from the same maternal lineage, and that maternal lineage was Avery Bancroft's.
To move on from the hair, I'd like to talk about the DNA profile that you mentioned earlier that developed on the left side latch of the briefcase.
Okay.
How did you test that?
I took this DNA profile and extracted the DNA from it and compared it and ran it through the database of CODIS, which if you guys have seen NCIS or anything like that, is the main database that they use. It is a nationwide search and is one of the most thorough searches. If you've ever gone to the hospital, gone into the Army, been arrested, incarcerated, and had to give a DNA sample, then it would be in that system.
What were your findings after this analysis?
I found this DNA to be Avery Bancroft's.
What is the probability that this DNA could belong to someone else?
The probability of that DNA being someone else's is astronomical. The odds of somebody else on this planet having the same DNA as anybody else is 0 out of 22 billion people.
Now, to move on from the DNA profile, you also mentioned the fragrance stain that you found on the inside fabric of the briefcase. What is this?
On the inside of the briefcase, there was a 1-inch in diameter clear liquid.
What did you do with that?
I took a small cutting of it for further analysis.
And how did you analyze that fragrance stain?
I used gas chromatography mass spectrometry testing, or just GCMS, which is easier to understand, which is essentially you take a temperature-controlled capillary column and it extracts the components, or the individual components of the substance so that we compare it to other substances.
Now, from your analysis of the gas chromatography testing, what did you conclude that, what did you determine that fragrance stain to be?
I determined that fragrance stain to be a fragrance called La Nuit de Warhay, which was found in Avery Bancroft's home.
Did you come to a conclusion in your analysis of the briefcase found in Chase Covington's possession?
Yes, I did.
And what was your conclusion?
I came to the conclusion that Avery Bancroft definitely came into contact with Chase Covington's briefcase. But I cannot tell you when Avery Bancroft came in contact with Chase Covington's briefcase.
Thank you, Dr. Sikorsky. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.